Right now, the world is very limiting to all kinds of opportunities and experiences, especially for going abroad. But I had maybe once in a lifetime opportunity to practice my art and my craft in South Korea with local craftsmen, to work with them, to learn from them, and to exchange whatever we can in about a month. So I'm very excited to tell you my story about it. The whole opportunity was because UNESCO creative cities from around the world had this kind of like exchange of craftsmen, and it was postponed maybe 2 times because of the COVID pandemic. But earlier this year, everything was set to be scheduled to happen actually in October and November. My application was to make 2 personal projects working with Korean materials and one in collaboration with a Korean artist. Basically wanted to work with a metalsmith, replacing my father, so to speak, so we can make a European style bookbinding but with Korean style metal fittings and stuff like that. I think one of the hardest things in the beginning was actually the travel itself, because from Bulgaria I had to take a flight from Sofia here to Istanbul, and from there to Seoul in South Korea, and later from there I had to take transport to the city where I was going to stay, namely Jinju City, which is in the south, and it took around 5 hours by car to get there. So in total my traveling was about 32 hours. Yeah, I had some jet lag the first few days, but I managed to quickly get over it. The first thing that hit me there was the language. I mean, everything is in Korean. People don't usually speak other languages, and the communication is very hard. And I thought that a majority of this world that I'm seeing right now is locked for me because I don't understand the language. But we had some help going around, teaching us the how-tos, going around with the bus, going to the supermarket and stuff like that. I was staying with 2 other international artists in accommodation where we shared a kitchen and a living room, but we each had our own separate rooms. I chose for my projects to work exclusively with hanji paper, which is the Korean traditional handmade paper. The other Korean material I wanted to use was silk, and actually the region, the Jinju City region where I was in, was the majority silk production area in all of Korea, and I had the opportunity to get some really premium silk fabrics, some of which I used for my book and others which I gifted to my mother so she can experiment with that type of textile. And my workshop was actually in a very nice forest-like area near a lake. It was called Jinyang-ho, and I went there every day with the bus around 8 o'clock in the morning, and took a walk maybe 1 hour in the park before I went to the studio to begin my work. And I prepared my food in the accommodation in a box, took it with me to the studio, ate there, basically spent my middle 2 weeks of the whole month I was there, basically all the time in the studio, because you know how much time it usually takes me to make a book, and I had 2 weeks to make 3 books. But I did manage really to experiment with their traditional materials and maybe show to the public a new way of using them, because the way they make bookbinding is very different from the way people used to do it and still do it in Europe and this area I'm more familiar with. I produced the 3 books in time. 2 of them are basically millimeter bindings with gold skin on top and the bottom, and one is bound in Jinju silk, and the other is bound with hand decorated by me hanji paper, a few layers of it actually. And I think one of the most exciting things I managed to do in this type of project was to create a silk handband that protrudes into the book edge, like the ones I do with leather usually. My third book was fully bound in leather, in blue leather. It was again goat skin. I decorated with blind tooling and gold tooling. And while I was working on it, my partner Master Tegyo, who is making traditional Korean fittings for furniture usually, he was making the corners and the clasps that were going to be later assembled to the book. And he was a wonderful guy. He took me around, he introduced me to Korean food, he brought me to Seoul for a couple of days where I managed to explore a lot of the cultural heritage sites like the palaces, the museums, and I really liked the National Museum and the Folk Museum. It was like really resembling Bulgarian village culture like I know it here, so I found finally a connection from our past. And Seoul was really a mixture of this type of traditional and contemporary types of areas. It was very strange walking from one area with skyscrapers and 20 minutes down the road you find this traditional type of housing which people still live in, and they have to, you know, keep everything like this appropriate type of atmosphere. So the culmination of all this was actually the Ginger Traditional Crafts Biennale. I had 5 of my works there. The Pillars collection, you already know about it. It was exhibited there, and it was exhibited along the 3 works I managed to produce during the residency in Korea. And my 2 colleagues, the 2 international artists, one from Benin, Africa, and one from Estonia, were there too, and we had a very similar experience. But other foreign artists were also invited, but only for the Biennale, from Thailand, from Italy, America, and so on. And all of this was really in combination with a lot of Korean contemporary and traditional folk craftsmen and artists, so it is really a wonderful mixture of contemporary, past, traditional, more artistic, and yeah, it was there was something for everyone in the end. And after all this, there was only very little time to do whatever, and we had to pack to go back home. I had around 40 kilograms of baggage and tools. I didn't bring my big presses, but I did manage to bring whatever I felt was necessary. But as I said, a lot of compromises were made, not only because of the time limits, but actually the tool limits that I had, because I wasn't working in a bookbindery and couldn't use local tools. I used my tools, so no big presses, no plows, no nothing. Basically, I had to improvise and work a bit like I used to work before I had much of the equipment I have now. Overall, the whole experience was really a big challenge for me, not only in work terms, but psychological terms as well. Being a foreigner so far away, barely understanding what everybody, being so far home from my loved ones, my family, my little boy. I missed his first words, so that was a bit hard thing to swallow, but you know, it was that was the situation. So I was very glad to be back home. I'm still getting over the whole experience, still don't know how exactly I feel about all this. There was a lot of negative things, a lot of positive things, and it's really hard to actually condense everything into one particular type of narrative. So this story has more or less been a scramble from here and there, more facts about the things rather than the emotional side of how I experienced it, because I'm still not ready to express it properly, I guess. But I'm really happy to be back here in my home, in my culture, and to work on my particular projects that I have in mind. And that one is really deep. I'll reveal soon more about it. But the thing I wanted to say about the current project is I'm just happy to delve in again into Bulgarian folk culture, Bulgarian folk art and influences, because I feel home at there, and it's something I like to be buried inside of. Wow, in Korean culture, although it was very different, very exciting to experience, it was hard to understand, and many times I felt lost in it, and I felt that local people, experience it in a way different from a foreigner, because they were born there. And at times it made me miss my own culture, missing these little nuances that I know only local people can experience, and they have the task of making it accessible to people around the world, and actually attracting the eyes to their own particular culture, like I'm trying to do with my books, and make Bulgarian folk culture interesting for the eyes of everybody, not just myself. So that's my take on everything. I hope you find this story interesting, and I'll be happy to be delving in more into my own particular work and show you a lot of new things.